there's no rule that any one gender should always be the masculine or the feminine. In fact, fluidity is the healthy approach. That's the way the world works.
Welcome back to the Lisa Lacroix Show, where I bring you long-form interviews with amazing people to explore relational mastery for business and for love through embodiment, intimacy, and communication skills. My guest today is extra special, someone I've been wanting to share with you for a while. John Wineland is a world-renowned teacher, speaker, and author who shares his gifts and his experience in the realms of embodiment and leadership and sacred intimacy. He's helped thousands of people, maybe more, integrate spiritual connection with physical presence and relational depth. And I'd say he is helping shape an incredible new generation of embodied leaders, teachers, and lovers, which I've personally gotten to witness.
That's pretty good.
And I've personally gotten to witness it, John, as part of your 1,000-hour teacher training program during the past 4 years. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. But thank you so much for being here. Welcome, John Wineland.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see you.
The work that you do in the world has been such a big part of my own healing journey, and especially around the repatterning of my relationship with the masculine after being married for 20 years and now divorced for 7. And so I want to talk about my personal experience with you, with the work, and how it has been foundational, not just for me personally in that way, but also to the relational and communication coaching that I now work with other people in.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and it was beautiful to have you in teacher training. We miss you. And it's been nice. I think we started it 2018. And it's been nice now to see people come out after 3, 4, 5 years like yourself that are really, have innovated on the work that I do and bringing your own special sauce and taking it into the world in your own special way, and seeing there's like a whole generation of teachers now that are, thriving and supporting people. And it's really satisfying for me to see. I know Kendra, my co-teacher, who you know well, and I think you've had on the show, also feels the same way. It's a really satisfying experience.
One of the things I really appreciate about your approach to teaching and to leading new teachers is you really do take the perspective that it is for us to integrate and metabolize all the teaching and learning, and then to come up with our own unique transmission of it. And you say that over and over again. And I think it's a really powerful and sometimes uncommon approach to teaching teachers. There's a real humility in that I really appreciate.
Yeah. Well, my thought was, I the way that I learned was I had a main teacher that I took a lot of my information from and a lot of my experience from. And then I incorporated a lot of other modalities on top of that, and then practiced it. And then it became my own language, so to speak. So that's the way I learned, by incorporating things, practicing things, embodying things, and then sort of offering y'all what I felt worked for me and what I felt worked for people, in my teaching spaces. And, and I love seeing people do that, because ultimately we are the teaching. Right. So our life experience is the teaching, our perspective is the teaching, our connection to the divine is the teaching. So of course it's going to be unique for every teacher.
What you're referencing now is really important for anyone coming into the teacher training program and anyone who's considering it, which is the first year is structured around our own personal work and our own depth and our own healing and our own personal journey. Because as you just said, if we're not doing the work ourselves, how can we possibly teach it and coach other people in processing the same kind of information? So I love that the first year is the personal process, and then the second year is more around the teaching, and the third year is finding your own transmission. Is that how you would articulate it?
Yeah, I mean, the first piece is your own personal practice and really just steeping in your practice and not so much worrying about how you're going to teach it. Because people oftentimes will leap to, they'll have an experience in a workshop, or they'll have an experience in a practice, and they'll be like, oh my God, I want to bring this to the world, which I get. I was the same way. but let's just cool our jets and like steep in the practices, steep, just like you would steep in a martial arts practice, or if you were learning to dance or learning anything, you'd really want to steep in the practice of it. And then the second year, we start to open that up and we have people actually learn the different musculature of holding space for others, right? Of learning to assist. We teach them how to assist and how to set up spaces and how to move from holding space for a group in a deep experience to actually being part of that deep experience. And then learning those two nervous system musculatures is a whole skill in and of itself. And in my training, I did that for almost 5-6 years before I started actually teaching. And that really helped to give me the capacity to be able to do both, to both feel what's happening in the practice and also feel what's happening in the entire room. And then, as you said, the third year is really about like, okay, so now you've had a couple years of practicing and then holding space and practicing. And now you've got this, hopefully the channels are open and you're starting to get some of your own downloads in how you want to bring embodiment, sacred intimacy, sexual polarity, all the beautiful things. There's healing modalities that we work with as well, and how you want to bring that into the world. And, some people want to focus more on communication. Some people want to focus more on embodiment. Some people want to do both, and it's all great.
It's been super exciting for me to explore that exact question, is how do I bring this piece in with the 25 years of speaking training that I've been working with, and how do they integrate? And it's been super fun and sometimes challenging to figure out where they overlap. But in so many ways, a lot of the practices are synergistic and even the same kind of practice, but applied in a slightly different way. And like you said, watching other people do it too in their own way that can be so different. That's another thing about the teacher training that I really valued a lot, and that was quite a transformation for me, is the focus on devotional assisting.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really arrive with that as a concept so much, but I
Yeah.
really left with it as an experience of the beauty that it is to assist
Yeah.
and to feel part of a community of practice in ways that can be, I don't know, like bi-directional in terms of support.
It's a kind of seva. It's
Yeah.
a kind of devotional offering, but
Yeah.
there's so much. I mean, I learned so much by not only assisting David, my teacher, but also it's assisting other teachers, right? And I got to learn and I got to practice and I got to deepen my body's capacity to hold and express. And so even though I was assisting and I was technically supporting somebody else and being devotional to supporting them, I got so much information from that. And so it became a really beautiful exchange. And I think also too, just people learning to be devotional, to slow down and just be devotional to the field that's getting created in a workshop, right? And in our workshops, the work is to create a field of love, right? And we create a field of love, and within that field of love, we can overcome patterns and we can break through, limitations, and we can heal certain traumas, right? And we can do things really powerfully if that field of love is created and held with a tremendous amount of devotion. And if somebody's thinking about like, oh, what about me? And why am I not at the front of the room? And why aren't they asking me my opinion? And, that fucks with the field of love. And it really dampens what's possible inside the space. So it's a great way to check our egos. It's a great way to deepen our capacity. I remember having to sit like, more or less still for 6 hours a day, listening to my teacher answer questions and just hold the space and breathe the room and, just kind of really be holding down the energetic piece. And because I did that, I was able to receive so deeply his teachings. Whereas if I would have been solely focused on, well, I know the answer to that, or why doesn't he ask me that question? Then I would not have received those gifts.
I think I've gotten a lot of what you just described from the practice of assisting, certainly in your containers, but then in the last year, assisting so many other people, seeing all the different layers. But also, I think it is really the field of love piece. It's the experience of being able to offer devotional love in support of someone else's transmission that I experience to feel so, so good.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a community.
That we're all in this larger intention together. together. And then it also did truthfully really come home when I got to experience receiving it, when some of the people from teacher training came and assisted Speed and me recently,
Yeah.
and how that felt. It sort of was the full circle, you know?
It's lovely. It's lovely to have that. And I think this group, I don't know, the 24 or so people that are actually actively teaching over the last few years, they're really on the front lines. They're on the avant-garde of creating a new industry, right? I mean, this is a new industry. I mean, David Data, my teacher, was doing this in the 80s and 90s, but it was literally just him and a couple other people traveling without the internet and going from town to town and, setting these things up. But now it's a real industry. I make a really good living doing it. I hope you make a living doing it. You know what I mean? It's like there's a whole field of embodiment and of practice that's opening up, and y'all are on the avant-garde of that.
When we're all out there teaching and assisting each other, I'm seeing exactly what you're saying is the community rising to serve what feels so deeply needed. When you get out there and teach people, wow, people need this so much.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
much. I want to talk about some of the things that have been the most profound impact for me through teacher training, and that have me inspired to go out and support that for other people. And what I think is one of your gifts, I've said this many times also to many people, which to me is the ability that you have, the special gift that you have in practice and in teaching to reveal the desire and the pain of the masculine heart to women and the feminine heart to men. And I sat in so many practices looking at men and feeling seen by men with the guidance that you had to see the pain and the desires that they had, that I had to, with so much humility and so much heartbreak, recognize that I did not successfully always bring in my 20-year marriage.
Yeah.
And it was heartbreaking, but also heart opening. And then that in combination with the reconciliation process where I got to really go and revisit it. Oh my gosh, transformed so much around my ability to see men and to feel compassion and see the ways that we miss each other. To that, you know what I'd love for you to speak to, because I feel it's so pervasive, so ubiquitous, that we just miss each other over and over. And I feel like I see it everywhere in relationships in my work with people. So if you had to share with men something that they are missing about women and vice versa, how would you speak to that?
It's always, how attuned to her are you, right? And this idea, the difference between being in a state of being that is receptive to the flow of love, let's call it, or flow of energy, right? And the difference between loving her from that place and loving her from a place of strategy. And, which is where a lot of men, like, how can I make her happy? Or how can I keep her from being angry? Or how can I give her an orgasm? Or how can I make her never want to leave me? Or how can, all this, how can I get her to shut up and stop complaining? I mean, there's a whole, men are constantly strategizing, and that strategy has a certain frequency, right? It's a certain sort of transmission that is, for lack of a better term, I hate using this term, but it's so just low vibration, just a low vibrational frequency. And when we're in that state of being, when our bodies are tight and our minds are active and our hearts are closed, we literally see the world and our partners in a certain way. And so we can't actually see the deeper parts that you're talking about, or we can't actually open into a deeper expression because we're locked in a habituated state of a low transmission. So when you start to breathe and you start to open your heart and you start to attune yourself to another's body and another's heart, and this, all of a sudden there's this sort of elevation that happens that removes the film from our eyes and allows us to see and feel from a different life condition. It's, it's kind of Buddhism 101. We have the 10, there's hell, hunger, animality, love and growth, and there's, absorption and bodhisattva, and there's all kinds of these elevated life conditions. And in the elevated life condition, we see each other different. We have to earn, the elevated life condition has to be earned. It's not necessarily just given. We have to unwind the habits of our body minds. We have to unwind our habits of closure. We have to breathe, we have to move, we have to express, we have to, be still, we have to do all the things to earn the capacity to elevate ourselves. And so that's what tends to happen in practice rooms is you've got me or somebody like me, you in your workshops, kind of holding people and nudging them into these deeper states of love. And in those deeper states of love, you can see each other differently because you're not in the wounded transmission that we tend to live in our relationships.
I think that speaks to the power of the embodiment piece as the starting point and the center. I would also say that from my own experience, and maybe because my lens is very much around communication and the ideas and the transmission of the words, is that there's something to knowing that the masculine wants to be respected and wants to be trusted and wants to win. These are some of the things that I've heard you say over and over again that kind of hit me in a way that was like, what? Oh man, did I screw that up?
I mean, if women knew how much men do,
yes,
it's really about making them happy.
Yeah.
I actually saw Om Rapani do this really beautiful post recently about where he listed all the ways that men provide. Yeah. Everything from attention to food to love to presence to safety. And there's just all of these ways, all the ways that men are trying to provide for you. And I think that women are so focused for lots of valid reasons on what men aren't doing or what they're doing, unconsciously, but they're missing all of the ways that men want to make you happy. And I think, again, you've probably heard that message before, but when you hear it from an elevated life condition, it penetrates differently. So my job is to put you guys in a trance and then to seed different ideas while your hearts are open. So when you've been practicing for 30 minutes and I say, feel the part of him that just wants to love you, because you've been practicing for 30 minutes, your heart's open and that can really penetrate. And then you actually see it in his eyes. And what it does is it rewires the neural pathways that didn't see that. And so now there's this whole new possibility unfolding in real time right in front of you that sticks because you're so open. You literally have greater neural plasticity, right? You actually have greater capacity to rewire habitual thoughts and patterns. And that's the sort of quantum physics magic of practice that I think a lot of people miss. And, you mentioned the reconciliation, which I received from one of my teachers, and it's actually a shamanic practice to be able to look at all of the relationships all the important relationships you've had and take a painstaking inventory on all the ways you hooked them, all the ways you cut them, all the ways you ignored them, all the ways you diminished them, and really put yourself in that position of pulling out those hooks and righting those wrongs. It is a very deep karmic experience, and it's not an easy one. I mean, it took a couple years, I imagine, for you to get through most of those big ones.
I did the reconciliation process with you 3 times in teacher training and twice in WRI. I tell people I did it 5 times. And even at the end of 5 times, when I felt so much freedom for taking responsibility instead of being the victim, for really recognizing where I had dropped the ball on seeing these things, where I had not trusted him, where I had castrated him, where I had just taken over leadership, where I had closed my heart because I didn't feel seen and heard and held, instead of keeping my heart open and being able to express it. When I really saw those things in so much detail, I even still was at a place where my ego was, well, but I'm not going to take it to him because, there was the little bit of a part of it that was still, I don't want to give him the satisfaction. And then when I saw that, I was like, fuck, okay.
A lot of people don't make it over the finish line, Lisa. So congratulations to you. Thank you for being such a warrior and doing that work, because it is a sort of a death process.
It really was.
To be able to go into that and really own. And in what I've found after doing my own reconciliations, there's still a couple women who won't receive it from me, right? And I hold out hope that there will be a time when that will happen. But what I've realized is that this is an ongoing process, right? That there is a, that you every few months, probably when you're in relationship, there's a need to do some kind of reconciliation. And every time you end a relationship, there's a need to do a reconciliation. And sometimes even with, just lovers, there's a need, right? And so our capacity to learn, to unhook, this came from Carlos Castaneda, and his argument was, we cannot open ourselves to the infinite while we're still all hooked to each other.
I felt that karmic piece very strongly. And thank you for recognizing the going all the way through, because I feel really proud of myself, because I really did go really deep into it, and I really did go all the way through it. And the amazing thing is it gave me so much liberation in myself, and it gave me so much trust that I can be more aware and be different in future relationships. And it also gave me so much commitment to helping people see their habits and their patterns and their roles, because now I see it everywhere. When I see people,
I know it's painful.
Yeah, it's painful. It's like, oh my gosh. Okay, can you see? And so
there's a couple pieces to the reconciliation I think are important to acknowledge. The first is an awareness, right? It's impossible for us to go back over our history and see our patterns again and again, the way we want to control people so that we feel safe, the way that we use power or seek power in these dynamics, the way that we, protect ourselves, all those things. You can't be aware of those patterns and then continue them. I mean, you can, but
it's painful.
Yeah, it's painful. And it's harder to do. And there's a process. I mean, it's a lifelong, it's a lifelong scrubbing of what it is, but it definitely makes it much more difficult to continue to do the same thing. And what I've realized now after, 10 years of that practice in particular, is that I'm so fat. I mean, I still fuck up. Of course, I'll get reactive, or I'll get sensitive, or I'll get immature, just like any human, but I'm so quick to catch it. I mean, sometimes in 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Oh, that was so wrong of me. I'm so sorry I said that. And you know what I mean? And then I'll get to the reason why. Like, I just felt scared and I wanted to control your reaction. And, and it's so, it becomes a tool that can relax another person's nervous system. So you've integrated your awareness and your communication so fully, and you've already laid yourself bare on the altar of humility, right? So doing it again and again becomes very easy. And that's the real skill, I think, and the real, ongoing gift of the reconciliation process.
And I think when you go through the process of laying yourself bare in that way and realize the amount of freedom it gives you to be more generous in love, I think feels like a reward in and of itself that is self-fulfilling. It's like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing it because it just feels so much better.
Now, here's another, people ask me this all the time. They're like, how do I know if I'm with the right person? Well, if you're doing a very deep reconciliation practice with them and you're getting nothing in return, that's a pretty good piece of information. Whereas most people who are open-hearted and, somewhat aware will recognize your efforts and try their best to reciprocate. And if they don't, then that tells you a lot about them. So it's also, I've found, a really good filtering process.
That reminds me of one of the things I've heard you say so many times to people, and I find it coming up a lot in my coaching with people too. If you're wondering, am I with the right person or not the right person? I think I've heard you say, for 3 months, go all in on being exactly the person you want to be in relationship. And then you can revisit that question again once you know you're clean, you're in integrity to the way you want to be.
People stay in relationships more because they know they haven't given it all. They'll talk about their partner, but some part of them knows, I haven't really shown up the way I know I'm capable of, or I know is possible. And until I actually give it my best shot, right? We're all going to make mistakes, but I give it my most sincere best shot for 3 months, 6 months. And then I see what it does to my partner or not. Then if I leave, I know I've given it everything I have.
If you're showing up fully the way that you want to in relationship, and you can't receive it, respond to it, meet it,
then next,
a lot clearer.
Next. Life is short. Let's not waste our time on somebody who's not willing to meet us. Yeah.
So I remember the first time, I think I've been at most of your Burning Man.
Oh, yeah. I think you have.
I always remember it being the first time I heard you talk about the three pillars
Mhm.
there. And then I think I've heard you talk about it since then. But is that still one of the ways that you're orienting around relationship? What I recall is it that you need to have the three things in common. You need to have sexual chemistry, the kind of polarity aspect. You need to have a common vision, and you need to have the ability to and willingness to regulate each other's nervous systems.
I've actually added a fourth. Originally, there was three, and the three are intimacy, which is the recognition of sameness, the everything from soul gazing to sharing fears, right? Like I'm human, you're human, I have a heart. There's no polarity in it. It's about,
Are
yeah, and we're
related.
seeing, yeah, recognizing our shared humanity. So that's the first one, right? That's where hard connection comes in. That's where, just really beautiful recognition of each other. And then the second one I've called devotion to love, where you are more devoted to what will create love in the moment than what protects yourself. So a lot of stuff falls into this. It's like it has a subcategory of lots of different things, from imago dialogue to nervous system devotion and nervous system down regulation. Like if you're devoted to love, you're looking all the time for what is going to support my partner's nervous system, what's going to actually activate that field of love in the relationship, not necessarily, in a workshop like we're talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
devotion to love, and then there's plenty of things, subcategories there. And then the third one is sexual polarity, right? So we need to know our sameness, and then we need to also celebrate the energetic differences that create this really juicy sexual connection.
Mm-hmm.
I came up with a fourth because my experience was, and I actually, learned this myself, is that there is a certain amount of deep work, personal deep work. The reconciliation would fall into this category. It also includes therapy and working with trauma and recognizing your pathologies and working with your karmic history and your epigenetics. Like there is deep work that each person has to do in
Yeah.
preparation for being in a sacred union, right?
Yeah.
If you're bringing, let's just use, the classic ones. If you're bringing avoidant, if you're deeply avoidant, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
have that pathology in your system, doesn't matter how much you practice intimacy. If you're still living in the wound and you haven't healed the wounds of your childhood and the wounds of your lineage, then you really can't enjoy a sacred intimacy. So I went back and I rewrote a fourth pillar. So now there's four columns. And I think that I'm covering all the fucking bases with this. And it also has been, like most stuff I teach, it's my personal truth, right? Like, I had to realize that with all of the skills that I've learned and all of the ways that I can create magic and all the things that I can do in relationship, until I actually went back and looked at my own childhood wounding and pathology and really took a deep dive, then I'm not capable. I'm not bringing the best self.
If we can talk a little bit about what we short form to card
Yeah.
three, the importance of that as one of the tools for,
Yeah.
I think, both sovereignty and also how we deepen connection. Both of those, it sort of overlaps with two of the pillars.
Card three is just what I didn't get in my childhood that I needed, that I've been looking for in my partners throughout my life. Right. I mean, that's the easy way to look at it. And so, what Imago has proven, and other therapists have proven this, Dan Tatkin and Esther Perel and Terry Real, it's now just common knowledge that the wounds of our childhood we recreate in our romantic relationships. We also recreate them in our jobs. We recreate them in our friendships, in our men's groups, in our women's groups, and our mommy and daddy issues are just, we have to deal with them. And so card three is the understanding that most of my complaints I have about my partner, some of them are legitimate, real moment issues, but the deep charge that comes from them tends to start in our childhood. In teacher training, what we did is we really recognized, like, hey, my father didn't pay attention to me. So every time you check your phone, that wound gets hit. And I think, like, oh, he doesn't love me. He doesn't pay attention to me. And all that charge all the way back to dad is activated. So we talk about acting differently and kind of sort of overriding that in a certain way. What I've learned is that in this first pillar, this deep personal work pillar, is no, that's not enough. You actually have to go back to those moments in your childhood and do the deep parenting and do the reparenting of yourself. And some of it can be ceremonial work, some of it can be, TRE work, the somatic therapy. There's a lot of ways. Hoffman, I mean, there's
Internal family systems.
yeah, the parts work, all that shit.
Yeah.
It's all there. It's all
Yeah.
there. But to really go back and look at that little kid, because unless you actually scoop out and integrate that pain, then it's going to be really hard for you to choose a different response.
I can see the power of your adding that pillar in, because I remember many, many times people saying, okay, great, I understand my card 3, but now what the fuck do I do with it? So
Yeah,
I
I
can
still
see,
can't stop myself.
yeah, exactly. So I can see the motivation for bringing that in to say, okay, now you got to go back and heal it. One
Yeah.
of the things I remember you saying that really struck for me around card 3, around the awareness piece, not so much the healing piece, but the awareness piece, was the part of the pattern that is that we not only pick partners that will represent our card 3, not give us what we wanted, and
Yeah.
that if we don't pick them, we'll create them, we'll turn them
Yes.
into
Oh,
that.
that's a
That was
mind
like,
fuck.
oh my God.
That's a mind fuck. Yeah, we will. We'll find ways to make them leave. We'll find ways to make them ignore us. We'll find ways to make them angry. My card 3 was about anger and withdrawal, right? Like the worst thing you could do is to get angry at me and then disappear, And so I kept creating that in my relationships. I'd be like, what the fuck? How am I still doing this? And I had to find, like, what was it? I had to pull the string and get to the behavioral root. So this first pillar is really about, like, how do we get to the behavioral root, which could be epigenetic too. I mean, a lot of this stuff gets passed down from our parents. So some of it's from our childhood, some of it's from their childhood, and we just sort of absorbed it. So it's really crucial. And I think finally, and this is one of the problems that I think happened in the polarity world. I posted about this a couple of weeks ago, about how we get so hopped up on the sexual polarity and intimacy piece, which is so yummy and pretty easy to create, right? You can learn those skills pretty fast, but that we ignore what's needed for emotional safety. And the emotional safety piece is really where you've got to go into the fucking underworld and go into the depths of the wounds that you've had, deal with them, and then come out of the underworld as well. But you've got to go in to do that. And I think a lot of people, that's really where the rubber meets the road. And one of the things that I'm seeing in teacher training that I'm really loving is that we're actually reparenting each other. We're actually reparenting each other. Like when that moment happens in a practice where the guy across from you is reminding you of your father or your uncle that touched you inappropriately. And then you have to, like, stay in that place and stay open. And then he gets to love you through that moment of very deep pain. You actually get reparented. And so the reparenting piece was something I hadn't actually considered, but I'm seeing it now. I'm seeing how in these communities, if there's consciousness, obviously if there's unconsciousness, we can re-wound each other. But if we're bringing consciousness to this, then we have a real opportunity to reparent each other, just like we can in really healthy relationships.
Well, you brought up the polarity piece, and I did say I wanted to talk a little bit about polarity as it's perceived in the world. And I've seen recently so many polarity is evil posts, and every time I read it, I'm thinking, did this person study polarity ever?
No, they didn't.
It seems to come from no understanding of polarity. And I think I don't know, maybe you can talk a little bit about where you think that trigger comes from. I felt like in From the Core, in the early part of From the Core, you did a really beautiful job of describing all the caveats you had to put in there. This is not about gender. This is available to everyone. And so you've been involved in the polarity world for a long time, and you've seen those coming and goings, and it's evil. It's the greatest thing.
When David first wrote his books, and this was 20, 25, 30 years ago, David Data, when he wrote these books, there wasn't as much sort of expressed wound around the patriarchy and the wounds of the patriarchy. And so with Me Too and the awareness of the patriarchy and all of that coming up, the idea of gender politics, let's call it, or gender identity, or the pain of gender oppression. Whether you're a man or whether you're a woman, or you're bi, or you're binary, or you're anything, right? So anything that wasn't white male, right, was
Yes.
oppressed. And so all of that is coming up and getting conflated with this idea of masculine and feminine. And it's understandable, but it really is a short-sighted approach. So if we break down the natural universe into its smallest elements, let's just call it an atom, but they're smaller than that even. And we break it down, there's basically empty space and energy.
Hmm.
So the entire universe is made up of those two polarities, empty space and energy. And, I'm a Buddhist, and in Buddhism, the mystic law itself, God, what we would call God, spirit of the universe, it has a latent and manifest, right? A sleeping or empty aspect and a manifest aspect, right? The manifest aspect is the feminine. The latent aspect is the masculine. So we're talking about energy and we're talking about emptiness. And if you look at humans, right, and you see a human who's more still and just feels a little bit more spacious and empty, you would receive them as being more masculine, man, woman, however somebody identifies. If you feel somebody who's deeply connected to their energy and able to move energy, that person is felt as more feminine. And so it's been really hard for people to separate, to tease apart the politics, the gender politics, which I get. But the reason why I continue to use those terms is because it helps us in the relational field, right? We're in the relational field, and it helps us understand ourselves. Like I just did a post yesterday on, men with feminine emotional bodies. And I happen to have a more feminine emotional body, meaning when I'm emotional, I'm more deeply connected to that experience. Like I feel my emotions deeply, I identify with my emotions very deeply, versus a masculine emotional body is more detached. I would be more a witness. I'd be more stoic. And the other piece that people often miss in the polarity world is that there's no rule that any one gender should always be the masculine or the feminine. In fact, fluidity is the healthy approach. That's the way the world works.
I was going to ask you why you keep on using it, as I prefer to use masculine, feminine too, instead of the more general terminology.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
seems like polarity is a first principle. And I think that's essentially what you just talked about from a scientific point of view. It just
It
is.
is. Look at there's a South Pole and a North Pole.
Yeah.
There's nothingness, and then there's energy, right? And so, it is a first principle. And, you replace, I think I said in the book, replace the words with other words if you would prefer that. But I
Yeah.
like them because I have, queer clients. I have men in EMLT, right? And they get it, when
Yeah.
I'm talking about your feminine or your partner's feminine, right? What your partner's feminine wants, what your feminine wants. Is your partner more masculine identified or feminine identified? It becomes really easy to spot when you just don't get so wrapped up in the labeling.
I think you also explained that even though you have queer people in EMLT and maybe in teacher training, primarily the people that come to you they're primarily cishet.
Primarily heterosexual and cisgendered, yes.
Yeah. That may also be part of the reason why it seems to fit. It seems to naturally fit more often. And I would say that even though we do reverse polarity exercises sometimes, and they're pretty powerful when we do them,
Yeah.
where the women are in the masculine role and the men are in the feminine role.
They love
Yeah.
not having to. They love to just be
Yeah.
in the energetics of it, and it feels great to them. And women are
Yeah.
always surprised at how fucking hard it is to hold space.
Even so, because of the people that I think you attract a lot of times people that are primarily feminine identified like to feel and explore and deepen into the feminine, and a lot of times there's a lot of missing opportunities for that we're reclaiming in a way.
We're all kind of born in a certain spectrum. By the time we're 3, 4, 5, our nervous system is kind of set, and so you might skew slightly, a little more energetically identified versus a little more stillness identified. And wherever you are on the spectrum is fine, but then you get to choose what you want to work on. So for me personally, I was raised by all women. So by the time I found this work, I was totally unaware of how much flow I had in my body, and how much, just how identified with my emotional body and even a bit of indulgent in my emotional body I was. So I had to actually learn how to sit still. I
Yeah.
had to learn how to sit still as a gift to my feminine partner. I had to learn how to become the structure as a gift to my feminine partner. I chose that because I wanted to cultivate that aspect of my wholeness. And so when you're talking about cultivating your masculine or cultivating your feminine, whether you're a man or a woman or whoever other, you know, it's your choice. And a lot of stoic men or men who are very dense have to choose, like, I'm going to choose to like find flow in my body and find pleasure in my body and learn how to express my emotions. And, they consciously choose because they want to be whole. The goal in doing these practices is wholeness. It's not because you need to be more masculine or you need to be more feminine. It's so you can be more whole. And then then you get to have art because you've got a
Yes.
full palette to choose from.
I love that. I work with people around the idea of range, but I like wholeness. So coming back to where we began, as we start to wrap up, I'm curious to know, you mentioned about how it's feeling for you to see people going out into the world, coming out of teacher training, bringing their transmissions in their own unique way. And I wanted to ask you about one of your original mission statements. I remember you had the vision to create 1,000 men's groups
10,000.
in
Yeah.
10,000 men's groups. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering if that's still the primary part of the mission, or if the creation of teacher training and that focus has changed.
Still very much alive.
Yeah.
And in EMLT, which is the men's program I do every year, I do two primary programs. EMLT is a men's program, and we usually have 60, 70 guys in that. And then teacher training, we have about the same, 50 to 60 people. And in the men's program, I'm now training men how to create and lead their own men's groups. And so what I wanted to do, so I have an aspect of EMLT, which actually trains them like, this is how you start a men's group. This is how you hold a men's group. This is how you keep a men's group from disintegrating. This is how you work with each other, put each other on the hot seat, teach each other certain practices. And so I think in this last couple of years, I mean, if I track it, there's probably a couple hundred groups that have been started by, coming out of, my stuff. I've heard of a few groups that just go through the book, right? So it was one of those impossible goals that I knew I'd never really be able to see, but it was something that I just really wanted to put in the forefront. And recently, this idea of training men a little more specifically and certifying them on the men's group piece, I think will be very potent.
I didn't realize you were doing that. And do you have a similar mission or vision statement for teacher training?
I haven't because I just really wanted to see when we started this, it was because I saw that people were coming to my work and then just going off and starting to teach it, and I realized like that's I wanted to be responsive. I wanted to create a container. I grew up in the time when you didn't even think about teaching for 10 years. You didn't even you just put your head down and and practice. And I know that's not realistic. So I wanted to create something that was peer reviewed, that was actually a laboratory. And I'm sure you've experienced this. Like, you guys are learning from each other. So I wanted to create a community and a laboratory where people could really learn the nuances that each individual teacher brings and incorporate them, kind of like, Gertrude Stein created this thing and all the artists came together and they all learned from each other.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to create something where people could say, all right, if I spend 3 years and I put in the time, I put in the work, it's like I'm getting a doctorate in embodiment. And I'm actually seeing that happen. So I don't have a goal for it like that, but I am, maybe one is on the horizon as I, see people actually take this into the world.
I think one time you said, and it's always stuck with me, I quote it often, is something about the people that become attracted to teacher training and to going deep in the work. We're all depth junkies. I think we say, you're all fucking depth junkies.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's something too, when it attracts people like that, you do get to work as a laboratory with each other because there's that willingness to go deep and to explore and to support and to challenge and to, explore with each other and help each other learn.
And also to create a way of life around. I just had my birthday party the other night, and a bunch of the teacher training crew came, And I set up the party to be a little bit of a practice space, right? And we had two people from teacher training, doing shibari in one room. And then we had, Alan and a few other people teaching, practices in one room. And then they were kind of moving, all the teacher trainers were, moving through the party and just opening up the spaces. And so I think what I realized when I found this work in almost 20 years ago was that I wanted to live my life like this. Like I wanted to live my life, making art and is around relating and around embodiment and around opening. And I see that, and that's the thing I feel really touched by is just how artful everybody is in their own lives. Mm-hmm. The way they dress, the way their spaces are, the way they're making offerings in the world, the way they throw parties. It's sort of it's like it's not necessarily Burning Man, but there's a level of that kind of artistry that they bring to their lives that's so beautiful.
Like a shared commitment to the value of sacredness and love as art.
Well, I think the concept that David put forth that I've tried to really expand on in my own way is love is art. Mm-hmm. Right? You can love, you can make your loving artful, whether it's loving the way you love your friends, the way you love your community, the way you love your romantic partner, your family, and you can make your love a work of art. And once you get that concept, you're like, oh shit, like why would I do anything? Why would I do anything
Totally.
else? It just feels so good. Yeah.
100%. Well, there's so many other elements of teacher training that I'd love to share with people, like doing sacred theater and the way we go out into the world and light up rooms and spaces and all those things. And I'll put all the information in the show notes, but maybe just say a little bit of.
Well, we do.
Yeah.
I always find it so hard to, encapsulate, but I think teacher training is for people who really do want to make their lives art. Right? They want to make their lives art in the way they express themselves, in the way they lead their communities, in the way they lead their relationships, man or woman, whoever, right? It's really about like, okay, I want to be in a community of artists whose bodies are the works of art, right? And whose transmissions are works of art with the devotion to love as the central principle. And I can say without a doubt that the teacher training we do is the most fucking thorough and deeply expressed version of this work that's on the planet. So I'm very, very proud of it. I know Kendra is too.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about it and getting a chance to go a little bit more into the details, and so my audience can learn more about it. And I'll make sure all the information is in the show notes so people can learn more. And I just want to say before we wrap up, thank you so much for the gift that you bring to so many people and for your willingness to share your devotion, your love, and your experience, as well as I think your humility and your heart.
Thank you, Lisa. It's been a pleasure.